Somebody in this place knows what it feels like to pray and get no answer, to cry out in the midnight hour when you take and be met with silence. You've fasted, you've believed, you've worshiped until your voice went hoarse, and yet heaven seems quiet. Oh, I came to talk to somebody today who knows what it means to feel like God is distant. I'm not talking to the folk who shout when everything's going right. I'm talking to the ones who worship while wounded, who serve while suffering, who show up even when they feel shut out. The message today is real simple. What do you do when you can't hear God? See, it's easy to trust when you can trace him. It's easy to praise when you can perceive his presence. But what do you do when the line goes dead? When the heavens are brass and the silence is louder than your faith? My God, I feel this thing already. Today, we're going to dig into the dry places. We're going to confront the confusion, and we're going to learn not just how to survive the silence, but how to grow in it. Oh yes, there is purpose in the silence. There is power in the stillness. And just because he's quiet doesn't mean he's absent. Get ready, because God is about to speak again. When God goes silent, it's one of the most disorienting seasons in a believer's life. You find yourself searching the heavens for answers, begging for a word, longing for direction, and yet there is nothing but stillness. But just because God is silent doesn't mean he is absent. Silence is often a sacred space where God is setting the stage for something greater. It is a divine pause, not a divine punishment. We assume that communication is proof of connection, but sometimes God strengthens our faith not through what he says, but through what he withholds. The silence of God does not signal rejection. It can be preparation. It can be protection. It can even be promotion in disguise. In the silence, God is often working behind the scenes. When you're not hearing him, he might be building something in young endurance, trust, spiritual maturity. Silence requires you to stand on what you already know. It forces you to lean into his character, not just his voice. When the noise stops, that's when the roots go deep. Sometimes the most profound growth in your life happens in the invisible, inaudible moments. Think of the seed. When it's in the soil, it's quiet, it's dark, it's buried, but something powerful is happening beneath the surface. Silence is not the end of the story, it's the middle of the miracle. God often uses silence as a tool to get us to listen differently. You start examining your motives, your heart, your priorities. The silence makes you sensitive to things you overlooked when everything was loud. And it's in that sensitivity that God begins to prepare you for the next season. You can't enter a new level with the same noise from the last one. The silence filters out the unnecessary so that only what's essential remains. It's a refining fire that burns away the fluff and leaves the foundation. God has always used silence strategically. Before John the Baptist cried out in the wilderness, there were 400 years where God said nothing. No prophets, no visions, no divine utterances, just stillness. But when God finally spoke again, it was through the voice of one crying in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. Silence always precedes revelation. It's the holy hush before the thunder of his purpose breaks forth. So don't mistake God's silence for abandonment. Don't walk away because you don't hear him the way you used to. He's still God in the quiet. He's still working in the stillness. The silence is a setup, not for your despair, but for your destiny. Obedience is easy when you feel God's presence, when you hear his voice clearly guiding your steps. But true obedience is proven in the silence. When the heavens feel shut and every prayer seems to echo into emptiness, that's when real faith steps in. Obedience is not just about following instruction. It's about trusting the one who gave the instruction, even when you no longer hear his voice. When God goes quiet, it doesn't mean his command has expired. If he told you to build, you keep building. If he told you to wait, you keep waiting. The silence doesn't cancel the assignment. It confirms whether you're rooted in faith or just feelings. Too many people stop moving because they stop hearing. They think God's silence is a signal to sit down, but more often it's a test to see if you'll walk by faith and not by sight. What separates those who finish well from those who fall away is simply they obey even in the dark. They obey when it hurts. They obey when it doesn't make sense. They obey when they're misunderstood, because obedience is not about comfort. It's about covenant. You have to trust that if God gave you a word, he hasn't changed his mind just because he's not repeating himself. Sometimes God will go silent to see if you're following him or just following the sound of his voice. Will you still tithe when the blessings don't come quickly? Will you still serve when no one is clapping? Will you still love when you feel unloved? This is where mature obedience is born, not in the crowd's applause, but in the quiet place of commitment. Every act of obedience in silence becomes a statement of loyalty. It tells heaven, I trust you even when I don't understand you. Look at Abraham. God gave him a promise, then led him into years of silence. Still, he walked. Still, he believed. Still, he obeyed. That's why he's called the father of faith, not because he always understood, but because he always obeyed. And that's what God is looking for in us. Not people who move only when it feels good, but people who say, yes, Lord, even when their soul is screaming. Why? Obedience in silence creates something powerful in your spirit. It chisels character, trains your patience, and molds your identity. It teaches you to live not by emotion, but by conviction. That kind of obedience has weight in the spirit realm. Heaven honors it. Hell fears it, because a silent, obedient believer is a dangerous weapon. They can't manipulate it by mood or mizzled by noise. They're anchored. They're steady. They're unshakable. When God goes quiet, the enemy will do everything in his power to convince you that you're lost, forgotten, or off track. But in those moments, you have to return to the last word God gave you. If he spoke it, it still stands. God's word does not expire with time or change with seasons. What he said in the light is still true in the dark. The silence is not a call to panic. It's a call to remember. You have to anchor your soul to the last clear instruction and walk in it with confidence, even when the path ahead feels uncertain. Sometimes we get so caught up in chasing fresh words that we ignore the power of the word already spoken. God doesn't speak to entertain you. He speaks to establish you. If he told you to forgive, then forgive. If he told you to start that business, start it. If he told you to stay, then plant your feet and trust that he is still guiding, even in the quiet. Too many people about their purpose in the silence because they think the stillness means the assignment has changed. But silence is not confusion, it's confirmation. If the last instruction still applies, then the next move is simply keep walking it out. Faith is not proven in the presence of sound, but in the presence of silence. It's in the waiting that we find out whether we're leaning on God's voice or God's character. When you can't hear him, you've got to trust what he already said. His word is alive and it carries weight beyond the moment it was spoken. That word has staying power. It has direction and protection built into it. It will hold you when your emotions can't. It will steady you when your circumstances shake. You don't need a new word. You need to obey the old one. Look at Jesus in the wilderness. After being baptized and hearing the voice of the Father declare, "This is my beloved Son." He went into 40 days of silence. No voice, no dove, no angels, just hunger, heat, and the devil. But Jesus didn't panic. He didn't question his identity. He stood on what had already been said. That's your model. When the enemy tries to make you question your calling, point back to the last thing God declared over your life and say, "It is written." That word still speaks even when God is not. Standing on the last word builds spiritual maturity. It teaches you not to rely on constant affirmation, but to rest in divine assurance. It's not about always hearing something new. It's about faithfully walking in what's already been revealed. When God speaks again, it will often be to build on what he already gave you. But if you abandon that foundation in silence, you'll miss the next level entirely. So when the voice fades, the instruction still stands. When the cloud lifts, the command remains. Trust what he last said, because his word doesn't change just because the volume does. When you're going through a season where heaven is silent, it can feel like abandonment. But the silence isn't a sign that God has left you. It could mean you're in the middle of a test. And like any good teacher, God is often silent during the test. Teachers don't talk while the exam is in progress. Their silence isn't neglect. It's intentional. It means the time for instruction has passed, and now it's time for demonstration. You don't need more explanation. You need to apply what you've already learned. The silence is not punishment, it's promotion in progress. In school, a test measures how much you've retained, how much you understand, and whether you're ready to move forward. The same principle applies in the spirit. There are moments when God steps back, not to leave you, but to see what you'll do with what he already gave you. Will you still pray when you don't feel him? Will you still believe when the answer doesn't come quickly? Will you still walk in faith when the lights go out? These are the moments that define your maturity, not your shouting, not your dancing, not your scripture quoting, but your ability to remain faithful when the spiritual classroom is quiet. Testing seasons are uncomfortable because they expose what's real and what's religious. They sift out shallow faith and demand deep trust. When God tests you, he's not trying to make you fail. He's showing you what's in you. He already knows your heart. The test is so you can know it. It's to reveal what's been growing in the soil of your soul. Pressure uncovers faith or fear. The silence surfaces trust or insecurity. It's in the test that you find out whether you've been walking with God or just walking with your feelings about God. Job is a perfect example. God allowed him to be tested on every level: health, family, wealth, reputation, and in all of that, God went silent. But Job didn't curse God. He wrestled, he wept, he questioned, but he never quit. He held on to what he knew to be true about God, even when it didn't look like it anymore. That's what the test is about. Holding on to God's character when you can't trace his hand. It's choosing to trust his heart, even when his voice is missing from the moment. The test is not forever, but how you handle the silence will determine what comes next. If you pass the test, you come out with greater authority, deeper faith, and refined vision. God's silence doesn't mean he stopped working. It means he's watching to see if you've learned what he's taught you. The silence demands that you stand on past instruction and internal conviction. You don't need to hear to be holy. You don't need noise to be faithful. You just need to remember that every silence has purpose and every test has an ending. Worship is not just a reaction to God's presence. It's a declaration of trust in his character. When you can't hear God, when your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling and the atmosphere around you feels empty and dry, worship becomes your lifeline. It's the sound of your spirit reaching beyond what your senses can grasp. Worship in the silence is not about how you feel. It's about who you know God to be. When the whisper of his voice disappears, your worship becomes the invitation for his presence to return. It's your way of saying, even if you don't speak, I still know you're worthy. There is something powerful about worship that's born in the silence. It's pure. It's not driven by blessing, not driven by goosebumps or answered prayers. It's not about the miracle, the breakthrough, or the next big thing. It's about loving God for who he is, not just for what he does. That kind of worship has weight in heaven. That kind of worship touches the heart of God. It's the kind that says, Lord, I may be confused, I may be hurting, I may feel abandoned, but I will lift my hands anyway. I will open my mouth anyway. I will praise you anyway. When you worship in the silence, you build an altar in the middle of your uncertainty. You create space for God to move even when you don't know how or when he will. Worship becomes your weapon. It confuses the enemy because he expects you to fold in the silence. He expects you to shut down, to walk away, to get bitter. But when you choose to worship anyway, you remind hell that your faith is not built on sound, but on substance. You remind yourself that even in silence, God is still sovereign. David understood this. Time and time again in the Psalms, he poured out his pain and frustration at God's silence. But he never stopped worshiping. He would cry, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me?" And then in the same breath declare, "But I will trust in your unfailing love." That's the rhythm of real worship. It's honest about the silence, but anchored in God's goodness. Worship is the bridge between your questions and your confidence. It's what keeps your heart soft when everything else is hard. Sometimes the whisper doesn't return right away. Sometimes the silence lingers longer than you expected. But if you'll keep worshiping, your heart will stay open, your spirit will stay in position, and your ears will be ready when the voice of God speaks again. Worship keeps the soil of your soul fertile, so that when the seed of his word comes, it doesn't fall on dry ground. Worship until the whisper returns, and when it does, you'll be ready, not just to hear it, but to carry it